Welcome to episode 12 of the Liberty Itch podcast. My guest today is Topher Field. Topher is the multi-award-winning director of Battleground Melbourne, a powerful documentary about the lies and grotesque human rights abuses of the Dan Andrews government and Victorian police during the COVID sham. It is a superbly produced, directed and narrated film that you can actually watch for free at battlegroundmelbourne.com. To anybody who does not know or does not understand why some of us continue to harp on about the government's COVID crimes, I highly recommend watching this film. However, I must warn anyone who, like me, was in Melbourne and lived through Dan's fetish fantasy to cosplay a communist dictator. Battleground Melbourne can be unexpectedly upsetting viewing. But Topher is more than an award-winning director. He was also Australian Libertarian of the Year in 2022, Libertarian Activist of the Year in 2016, and he is author of the book Good People Break Bad Laws. Currently, Topher is releasing top-quality, free online content every day in an inspirational effort to help push the upcoming Australian elections toward freedom-friendly parties while sucking away votes from the majors, the crazies, and the teal tricks. For example, his videos using marbles to explain the preferential voting system have become an online meme. Anybody who watches them will understand and likely change their view of the system and how they vote for the better. Just search YouTube for Topher Field Marbles. It's not something I ever thought I would be saying. Bottom line, Topher is a libertarian who walks his talk. He truly wants libertarians to take over the world so we can leave everyone alone. Mr. Topher Field, welcome to the Liberty Itch podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Damon, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. Now, you are available at, and your book is available at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. So,
shameless plug. There you go.
Let's get the shameless plug done there.
Yeah.
Lovely photo on the cover there too. Look great.
Oh, shucks. Yeah.
That title infers that there are bad laws somewhere.
Sure.
Are you suggesting such a thing? And if so, what are some examples of these bad laws that good people might break?
100%. And I do go into quite a lot of detail in the book about what constitutes a bad law, because what I'm not saying is good people do whatever they want. Good people disregard the well-being of others for their own pleasure. I'm not advocating hedonism. I'm not advocating even selfishness. But there are boundaries on the limits of government power. And when governments overstep those boundaries, whatever they are writing, whatever laws they are writing that overstep those boundaries are inherently bad laws. In the book, I propose two key tests. And ideally, if you really want to be certain that it's a bad law, before you break it, before you get yourself into trouble, then just make sure the law fails both of these tests. I would argue that actually a law can very much be a bad law whilst only failing one out of the two. But if you're just dipping your toe in the water and see what this is a terrifying thing, make sure it fails both of these tests. One of them is the utilitarian test. Does this law cause more harm than good? Or another way to ask that question is, does obeying this law hurt people more than breaking it would?
Fair enough.
A utilitarian test. Now, the utilitarian is essential. It's very, very useful, and we need to keep it in sight. But we can never make our decisions entirely on a utilitarian basis, because from a utilitarian perspective, most of the world's dictators and tyrants would be able to mount a pretty compelling utilitarian argument to try and defend what it is that they're doing. The good of the greater good of the masses at the terrible harm of the few. The utilitarian arguments can be twisted to serve that purpose. So on its own, it's not enough. We also need to reference our principles. And I'm a libertarian. My principles are very much the non-aggression principle. But in particular, what I love about libertarianism is that it's actually one of the belief systems that has the most faith in our fellow man. All the other belief systems are very much about we need to control our fellow man because we can't have faith in them, right? Whereas libertarianism says actually, well, fundamentally, I believe in you. Damon, I believe that you are the best person to make the decisions that most affect you, and that the best arrangement possible is that you be the one that bears the brunt of the bad decisions if you make them.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And so the second test...
argument.
Yeah, correct. And so Libertine philosophy says I should be able to do what I want without consequences. That's a very different thing. Libertarianism says I should be able to do what I want, but the consequences are mine.
Yeah, with the
Right?
full consequences of my own
Correct.
actions. Yes.
Correct. And that's an entirely different worldview.
Yeah.
So the principles-based test for is this a bad law is, does the government have the authority to do it in the first place? And this is irrespective of whether the outcome is good or not. This is entirely separate to the utilitarian. Now, this leads us immediately to the question of where do governments get their authority from? Now, there's really only two places, and trust me, I've argued this 1,000 different ways with minds far greater than my own, and it comes down to only two things. You can believe in might makes right. I have power because I have the power to say that I have power and make you do and punish you if you don't.
I control the guns and the police and the army.
Correct. Or it comes from voluntary cooperation, the choice to participate. It comes from one of those two places. Now, interestingly, all of our Western governments claim that their authority comes from a voluntary accession of power, by the consent of the governed, by the people, for the people, of the people. This is the philosophy that we are told that we are governed under. I would argue in practice that's not even remotely true. It is very much a might makes right system. But let's just stick with this for a moment. Because if it's true that they get their power because we gave it to them, well, there's a funny thing that automatically happens with that. We can't give away what isn't ours. We cannot delegate to the government power that we don't ourselves have. And so if the government claims to get its power from us, delegating that power to it, we can immediately begin to calculate limits on the government's power, things that it cannot possibly have because we didn't have those things to give them in the first place. I can give the government my money because that's my money. I can't give the government power to take your money because that's not my money. Correct. I don't have that power in the first place. And this is obviously far more eloquent people than me have written extensively about this over the generations. And of course, we're building on top of...
I think it's Larkin Rose who wrote, was it The Greatest Superstition or...
Correct.
Yes.
The Fatal Conceit, I think was that his one?
Maybe it's the superstition. It escapes me right at the moment. Yeah,
but there's also that thing of a thief. I'm going to butcher the quote, but essentially, a thief is a thief, whether it's one man stealing to satisfy their hunger or whether it's a million men forming a thing they call the government. They're still stealing.
It's still the same thing.
And your human rights are yours, even if you are one person against the entire world. And so the minute a government claims to get its authority from the people, we can immediately apply a principles-based test to see whether a law is good or bad. And the vast majority of what we call law today instantly fails that test. The test is
I was going to say, a lot of laws are going to fall into this bucket.
It instantly fails the test. And this is why I, out of an abundance of caution, I wouldn't urge people to begin engaging in civil disobedience simply because it failed one of those two tests, right? I would say it has to fail both. Now, I, of course, came to the fore during all the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, Australia. We became the most locked down city in the world under our little petty dictator, Daniel Andrews. And for me, what I saw very much broke both of those tests.
Absolutely.
Obeying those laws and enforcing those laws was causing enormous amounts of misery and suffering, far more so than if we hadn't enforced
They weren't
those
laws, they were rules.
Well, correct. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Thank you. And secondly, the government does not have the authority to do that kind of stuff. They can't force you. You have the choice to stay home from shopping or to stay home from work. You can't be forced by me. And
Correct.
therefore the government can't force you. They don't have that authority. And so that's where I began to step out. And I'd been a goody two-shoes for most of my life up until that point in time. I dabbled in a few things here and there in terms of the philosophy of government and a little bit of sovereign citizen stuff along the way. And I dabbled and sort of stuck my nose into a bunch of different things and then kind of went, that's a bit of a dead end. That's a bit of a dead end. But broadly speaking, I was a goody two-shoes. I'm a preacher's kid, son of a preacher man, a Christian, and raised that way.
Yep.
And I've got my own journey, as everyone does. I'm not claiming to have been actually good, but I was a goody two shoes, if that makes sense.
You followed the rules.
Yeah, correct. And out I came during COVID, and I actually began to intentionally break the rules, as you've correctly corrected me, because they failed both of those tests. They were causing immense harm and misery, and the government did not have the authority to do it. And that began my journey into being an enemy of the state, really.
All right. Well, I mean, COVID is the obvious plethora of examples in that. But what are some other examples pre-COVID of
Yeah.
a bad law that a good person might break?
Oh, there's been so many.
Obviously, but
over the
let's
ages.
pick
I mean,
on a favourite.
We can immediately break Godwin's law and go straight to the Nazis if you'd like. Let's just fail.
In Australia. Let's narrow it down to Australia.
Okay, all right, let's keep it to Australia. So there's been an enormous number, and in a way, it's kind of, well, if you look on the economic side of things, it's pretty much endless. So there's an enormous number of laws in Australia, for example, locking Australians out of our national parks and our state parks and saying you can't access your own land. Well, this is a really, that seems trivial, but I'm going to put it to you that that's an incredibly serious bad law.
The slippery slope there. There's just, yeah.
Correct. Because what that does is it flips the relationship between we the people and the government, where we the people own the land and the government simply administrates some things for us and looks after it in certain ways, versus the government owns the land and decides whether we the people are allowed to access it. So a relatively trivial law, actually, if you look at it from an in-principle point of view, that is devastating to the rule of law. That is devastating to the very principles upon which we get told our civilization is founded. So that would be an incredibly serious one.
Well, you could take that all the way to the COVID example and go, if they can do that, then they can say that the footpath outside your home, you're not allowed to go there. So we're not locking you in your home, but you're not allowed to go onto public land. So, and that applies to then everything.
Which they literally did with their curfews. That's effectively what a curfew is. You can't set foot on the footpath outside your home. They were arresting people for putting their bins out after 8 p.m.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you would have heard this news, but just yesterday, the news broke that thanks to a court case that involved the releasing of a bunch of emails and so forth into evidence, we now have the smoking gun. So Daniel Andrews, when he imposed the curfew,
I've seen all of this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So he claimed that he had to impose the curfew because the police asked for it. And then on the record in a radio interview at the time, the police commissioner said, no, we never asked for this. Yeah. So he was caught out in that lie.
But we both remember this when it happened. Like, this is the thing that gets me with this whole thing, is that people are going, it's a shock revelation. You go, no, it wasn't. It's not a shock revelation. We were all there.
What Daniel Andrews did was he pivoted and he said, oh, actually, it was the medical advice. It was the medical advice that said I had to do it. So Daniel Andrews is a man who can't take responsibility. A sociopath is not a phrase I use lightly. I'm not one of these people that calls everybody a narcissist and a sociopath and a psychopath and this and that. Daniel Andrews, I think, is at a minimum, I believe him to be a pathological liar.
Yes.
And this is actually based on, I know a number of people that went to school with him. I've met them along the way. They reach out to me because of my profile and what I do. I'm yet to meet anyone that has anything good to say about him.
Yeah.
And one of the observations that came up consistently, and these were people that didn't necessarily know each other or know that other people were talking to me, but consistently what came up was that he would make up stories and he would lie about things, even things that were innocent, that didn't need to be lied about. He would lie. And then he would get caught out in the lie and he would just double and triple down. And he would be saying to people's faces things that everyone around him knew were a lie. And I believe that he has some level of some level of pathology in his dishonesty. And so when he got caught out lying about the police saying that we should have curfews, he didn't go, oh, actually, you're right. I just thought it would be a good idea. No. He pivoted and he said, actually, it was the medical advice.
Yeah,
well, now we have the email smoking gun from the relevant people saying, no, this never came from us. Now, that wasn't public at the time. It's only come out thanks to court cases later on. So
but
we know
it was even more ridiculous at the time. It's just sort of like, this is where we were mocking the idea of, the virus goes, comes out at 8 o'clock at night and then it goes back in at 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's why we can't be out when the virus is, because it's,
that's right.
Yeah, meandering around, ready to pounce. Yeah.
There's an enormous amount of regulation around our work, around our economic activity. And again, this is one of those ones, oh, well, you can't be a Sparky unless you've got a certificate. Okay. Sure, you're going to get in a lot of trouble if you do electoral work without knowing what you're doing. You could burn your house down. You could kill somebody. You could kill yourself. You could kill somebody that you love. I don't recommend it. Make sure you know what you're doing. But the idea that the government is the arbiter of that and that we shouldn't be allowed to let anybody do anything unless you've got government permission to do that. Well, that seems innocent enough. It's about safety. We're just protecting you. That couldn't possibly be a bad law, except that the minute you have to register or get permission to do something, that becomes a point of control. And we saw this during COVID. And I'm going to, we're not going to go down the Nazi example. We won't break Godwin's law, but let me piss off a whole different cohort of people. One of the reasons why a large number of people didn't come out and join the protests is because they were licensed gun owners. And what we saw in Victoria, as soon as the protests began to gather momentum and the police were looking for every possible way of shutting you down, they were using cameras to then facial recognition and identify people who were gun owners, and they would knock on their door and say, excuse me, we're going to review whether or not you're a fit and proper person, given your anti-government, and your dangerous, your grandma killing behavior recently. And so they used that point of permission as a point of leverage to try and take them out of the fight, to not allow them to speak out. So everything you have to ask permission for, you are then giving the government leverage over you for. And so again, I would argue that not only are these sorts of laws productivity destroying, not only do they generate a terrible misallocation of resources, and people always say, oh, well, would you want a bad, I know somebody who had an electrician work on their home and the house burnt down because they didn't install the downlights correctly and the insulation caught fire. And I go, okay, yeah. And so you just said that person had an electrician. They were a licensed electrician, right? Yeah, and this was licensed. Can you imagine how bad it would be if we didn't have the licenses? Well, probably not much worse than having your house
burning down. Yeah, that's right.
It's a little bit like, there was a headline, a genuine headline in Australia that happened. It was unbelievable at the time, all about how someone had passed away from COVID-19. But the headline said, this, someone has died from COVID-19, but it would have been worse if they weren't vaccinated. And you're like,
they'd be more dead.
Yeah, they'd be more dead if they weren't vaccinated. You're like, I get that you've got a narrative to push, but can you see the absurdity here?
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. I had a big argument with a guy who was adamant that jaywalking laws were incredibly serious. We had to have jaywalking laws. And what's the upside of jaywalking? You just save a minute or two. Yeah, save a minute or two multiplied by millions of people, multiplied by 365 days a year.
That's right.
That has a meaningful benefit. You can't measure it necessarily, not directly, but it has a meaningful improvement. If someone's making the choice, I want to cross the street now rather than wait, walk 30 meters and wait, that's because that's of benefit to them in their own opinion, and they're entitled to hold that opinion. But this person was livid because they had a friend who had once been hit by a tram whilst crossing the street, whilst jaywalking across the street. And I said, mate, I don't mean to be insensitive, but I don't know if you've noticed. Trams are
big and slow and really loud.
Big. They're often brightly coloured. They make a lot of noise and they travel on tracks, so you know exactly where they're going.
And which, yeah. I'm picturing that scene out of, you remember the scene out of Austin Powers where the guy gets run over by a steamroller? Yes. And he's there going,
and you just go, okay, so at this point in time, we're writing laws for the lowest common denominator of the most, at the most absurd level, all right? So what are examples of bad laws? I would say anything that causes people to have to deviate their behavior from what their good faith intentions, what their good faith actions would have otherwise been. The minute you are causing people to have to change their behavior because the government said so, you have a candidate for a potential bad law. What that means is essentially, if you leave people alone, what most people would do most of the time is what they ought to be doing.
Yes.
And where we need the law, and that could be through voluntary actions. It doesn't have to be through the government structures that we take for granted today. But let's just assume where we need government is for those small number of people who are going to excessively step outside of the boundaries of what the rest of us would consider acceptable. Theft, murder.
God's laws. Natural law.
Yeah, okay. Where people are actually getting hurt. That's where we need some kind of an agreed method where we hold people accountable against their will if necessary. Okay? We do need a mechanism. We need to be able to hold people accountable against their will when the situation arises. But the vast majority of our laws are not about that. They're about nudging us in different ways. They're about keeping us safe. And they are about changing our behavior in ways that aren't life or death most of the time, and in ways where we would much rather do the thing that we actually wanted to do. We would much rather cross the street. Thank you very much.
Agreed.
I'm a grown adult. I'll decide when that's actually safe for me to do, and I'll decide whether the 30 seconds I save is worth the amount of risk I'm taking.
Yeah.
I'm a grown adult. I will make that choice. Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's really interesting you say about the jaywalking example, because I came across that when I came to Tbilisi, and I'd met some people here, and we were going to cross a really busy road, and there were a couple of police cars on the opposite side of the road, and it's a busy main road, like 6 lanes in one direction, and my friend just starts walking out into traffic, and I'm like, whoa, won't we get done for jaywalking like we would in Melbourne? And he's like, what's that? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, we've
Yeah.
got a law where if you cross the road and you don't walk a kilometre down that way to the nearest set of lights and let the, the little green man tell you can cross the road now, you get fined by the police. And he's like, we've got a rule that if you're an idiot and you step in front of a moving car, you get hit by a car.
Yeah.
Like they
Right.
don't care and they don't
Right.
police it because it's just so bloody obvious that you have no interest in stepping in front of a car and the car has no interest in hitting you. And what are the police going to do about it anyway?
Yeah.
The funny
And
thing that I found they were amazed by it, but the funny thing I found in Georgia is that there's an acknowledged acceptance by both police and citizen that there are a bunch of laws on the books, but they are never, ever enforced. And it's a social thing, but it's recognized at the highest levels of government. It's just like you don't enforce stupid laws because then the people will break the stupid laws, and then they won't be. They'll start misbehaving more and more because they stop respecting the law, and you wind up with a bigger problem.
I don't remember who it was. I'm going to say it was Cicero, but I don't actually remember for sure. The abundance of laws breeds contempt for the law.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about. When you write a law for every single thing, including every little petty thing, what you're saying is that breaking the law is a trivial thing because these are trivial laws.
Because they're trivial. Yes.
So now we go, well, I can break that and that's not a big deal. Now we've trivialized the law. We've trivialized all of them, not just the trivial ones. And so we do need to get back to a culture, and I love that, the sound of that, to even if they're dumb enough to write the laws, we're not going to be dumb enough to enforce them.
Well, the good thing is you can understand how it works because if there is a problem, if they don't police absolutely everybody speeding by 15 kilometers over the speed limit on a freeway when the freeway's empty, they don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you get into an accident, then you also get done because you were also speeding on top of whatever else it was. So it's like, don't be a dick, because if you do, get into trouble,
so
you're
this
get
is
into more trouble.
I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in exactly the concept that you've just described there. And I'm not a political philosopher, I'm not a legal philosopher, but just stick with me for a second here. The principle that says I should be allowed to do what I want as long as I'm not hurting anybody else. We should have an agreed set of social norms, which you can exceed. For example, speed. All right. We're going to post speed limits. They're no longer binding. But if you choose to go faster than that and you get into a crash, you are a priori assumed to be responsible for the crash until proven otherwise. And you are held to a higher level of liability and responsibility unless you can prove that you shouldn't be. All of the assumption goes against you because you chose to do something that was recommended against. And there's actually a biblical precedent for this. So in the law of Moses, lots of which is not relevant at all, but this particular one is. It says if a man gets gored by an ox, it's not the fault of the owner of the ox. The blood of that man is on the ox, unless the owner knew that his ox was prone to charging at people, at which point the blood is on the head of the owner, unless the owner put a sign on his fence and made sure it was properly restrained and someone entered the pen. At that point, even if the ox was known to gore, the blood is on the head of the person who chose to enter against the warnings, right? And so what we have here, even in the law of Moses, written 4,000 or so years ago, is this concept of if you're taking responsibility for the circumstances around you and you're being a responsible adult, then if something goes wrong for somebody else, that's not on you. But if you're engaging in risk-taking behavior, knowing that it is going to cause risk to other people, then at that point the liability comes back on you. And I think a principle like that is exactly what we need to see.
Well, I don't drink, never have, never been drunk in my entire life. I still despise seeing the booze buses everywhere. It's like, it should be a case of, if you get into an accident and you are drunk, they absolutely throw the book at you. You go away. It should be absolutely unreasonable punishment because you did that. You took those actions that lead to that outcome, and you're going to be screwed. And then it would be a case of people just going, I'm not going to drink and drive because it would be a really dumb thing to do. And if this happens, it's my choice. But taking people who, Stopping everybody on the road and having a traffic jam for 2 kilometres while they breathalyze every person, assuming everyone's a criminal, and then don't actually do anything when the drunk person has the accident. They go, oh, well, you were drunk.
And the hazard they create, I've had situations where you come around a corner at a completely reasonable speed in an area which normally flows, and all of a sudden there's just a wall of traffic in front of you. Now, I've never personally had an accident in that situation because I don't drive around corners at a speed where I wouldn't be able to stop if there was something there. That's just motorcycling. I've spent years as a motorcyclist. It's just ingrained into you.
Man. I know. Yep.
And you might have been the one who was illegally in the right, but you're also the one who's in the morgue. So it's a level of accepted risk. But I've seen people have rear enders, and I've seen the aftermath of rear enders in the lead up to booze buses and things like that. But also this concept of we have the authority to stop and search you. Yeah. Right? And that's what it is. A breath test is a type of search. Yeah. We have the authority to stop and search you at our discretion, and you don't have the authority to say no. You don't have the option. And if you try to say no, we will make all kinds of awful assumptions about why that is and prosecute you accordingly. This, again, completely inverts the relationship between the government and the governed. They're meant to be our servants. And they say, oh, but we are serving you. We're keeping the community safe. You could sit and argue, and you can do cost-to-benefit analyses on how much time is spent on trying to catch drunk drivers versus how much harm they really actually do, blah, blah, blah. And people say, oh, you're heartless because you're talking about money. You're boiling this down into economic terms. Well, sorry, all of life boils down into economic terms.
That's right.
And the cost-to-benefit analysis, a drunk driver will only kill themselves once. Yes. Okay. And this is something like we actually have to get much more comfortable with death. And I'm going to get crucified for saying this. We have to get much more comfortable with the fact that fuck around, find out is a law of nature. And part of the reason why we end up with the terrible outcomes that we often get in modern life is because people didn't experience the bad outcomes at an earlier stage. Mm-hmm. They didn't actually, we are so safe today. We are so protected. People talk about the road toll. Go back in history and have a look. Find me any other time in history where travel was safer than it is today. I defy you to do it.
On a per capita basis or a per traveller basis.
Based on time on the road and or based on distance traveled. There is no metric by which you can find an era where travel was safer than it is today. Yeah. More people died per kilometre travelled. More people died per hour spent travelling at every other point in history per capita or per mile or per hour of travel engaged in than die today. And there's a law of diminishing returns. The 80-20 rule applies to every area of life. You can get 80% of the result for the first 20% of the effort. Yeah. If you want that last 20% of the result, well, that's going to require another 80% of the effort. Bureaucrats love nothing more than an impossible target to aim at. Because for them, it's not effort. Every year they fail, they go, well, we need more budget, we need more rules. I told you that we needed to introduce that XYZ little scheme that I dreamed up when I was drunk one night, and that would save lives. And now look, we haven't saved lives. We have to implement that thing, and I need more budget.
Died. We need to do this.
You can, if you're a bureaucrat, you can build a career on failure, and there's no easier.
That's how it's done.
But the fastest way to guarantee failure is to give yourself an impossible target. I won't rest until no one dies on our roads. Yeah. Well, congratulations. You've just written yourself a paycheck for the next 40 years for as long as people are dumb enough to buy into this idea that we can have a world where no one dies on our roads. And so there actually has to be an acceptance of the cold, hard reality that everyone's life, and present company not excluded, Damon, your life, me, my life, everyone watching this, every single one of our lives has a price that it is worth. Yes. And if we are asking society to pay a cost per life saved that exceeds the average value of a life, then I'm sorry, we are making society poorer. And I'll give you a simple example. Reducing speed limits to save lives. People say, and this is economists call this the problem of concentrated costs and diffused benefits. Or in this case, concentrated benefits and diffused costs. So you reduce people's speeds on the road, they spend longer getting to and from work. You've cost time out of people's lives on a daily basis, but a few less people die. That's a really concentrated cost that has been saved from those people, or in this case, that's a really concentrated benefit. There's some people that would have been dead that are now not dead. right? That's a very concentrated benefit. It's a very diffused cost. The cost is 15 minutes a day across 4.5 million people traveling to and from work every 5 days a week. If you add it up, we are losing more life hours and more quality of life. If you want to get right deep into it, you can look at the quality of life adjusted years, and you can actually just sit there and go, we are now spending more than a life's worth of life per life saved. Now you could offset, you could weight that a little differently and say, well, a life actually lost is different to 15 minutes a day lost. Okay, we can wait for those things. We can adjust for those things. But there comes a point where you are spending so much per life saved that you're actually now killing people. Now, the ultimate example of that is COVID.
Yeah, I was about to say.
The ultimate example of that is lockdowns.
Yeah,
destroying
and
people's mental health.
How many decades worth of poverty eradication did they eradicate in that couple of years of insanity? And it's like they've literally thrown hundreds of millions of people into poverty who are dead now or have died already, and all they've killed way more than even their absurd numbers have claimed died from with COVID or whatever they're saying.
So I did a video on exactly this issue early in COVID. I was trying to look for angles that would try and get people to wake up and realize that we were going down the wrong path with all the lockdowns, etc. Obviously, I failed. But one of the points that I made was exactly what you're talking about. We are interrupting food supply. We are interrupting global trade and transport, and that's going to make food and staples more expensive. Now, you and I might go, oh, well, I have slightly less disposable income. You know, I might say, well, I got to have one less beer. You might say, I've got to do one less line of Coke. Or in your case, obviously, I have a little bit less protein. Hey, skip the pre-workout before you hit the gym.
1.5 scoops instead of 2 scoops of powder.
That's right. Okay. But for people who are at the margins, again, using economist speak, for the people that are actually only just getting by, the fact that the cost of one of the 5 main staple foods around the world just went up by 20% now actually pushes them into genuine malnutrition. For the people that were already in malnutrition, it pushes them into starvation. For the people that were already in starvation, they die. Yeah. And we have the numbers on this. Yes. We know what happens. If the per ton price of rice, of golden rice, goes up by $1, we can calculate the number of people that will kill.
That will kill,
right? And yet we recklessly, in our privilege, and I don't use that word lightly, but in our privilege in the Western world, with the wealth that we have,
who use it as a weapon against us,
we sit there and go, oh, but grandma, we have to save grandma. Newsflash, grandma is already 78 years old and has 6 other things trying to kill her.
Grandma's already in an aged care facility, which is God's waiting room, and she's only got 2 weeks anyway. So
correct. And what we're talking about are 8-year-old kids. Now, you can't see them because they're on the other side of the planet.
That's right,
but we are going to push kids into starvation, destroying 60 years of quality life that they could have had ahead of them before they reached the level of ailing that your grandmother is now at. And we're going to do that so your grandmother has 6 months. I'm sorry, that is perverse. That is twisted.
Yeah, it really was. It was just the height of evil, the whole thing. It's funny, the conspiracy theorist would look at this sort of thing and say it's intentional, it's a power grab and all the rest. I personally believe it's something worse than that. I think it's incompetence and ignorance. And they genuinely think, stupid people genuinely think that they're trying to help by imposing more laws to make up for the bad laws that they had before that. And it's just this snowballing effect.
It's not working because we need to do more of it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So C.S. Lewis, I think, has the granddaddy of all quotes on this. Yeah. Of all tyrannies, C.S. Lewis said, of all tyrannies, a tyranny exercised for the good of its subjects may be the worst. A robber baron may be satiated. Their cupidity might be satiated. He says it beautifully. But someone who oppresses for your own good will do it without end because they do it with the approval of their conscience. Obviously, I've butchered that quote, but that's the essence of it. That's exactly what we saw during COVID. And you're dead right. It's way worse than a conspiracy. There isn't a conspiracy. Yeah. Right. When I was involved in the protests down in Melbourne, where the police came out with lots of violence, and there was a particular day where at the Queen Elizabeth markets in sort of just tucked into North Melbourne there, and that was the day the public order response teams came out, round helmets, round perspex shields, and batons.
Yeah, I remember.
They came out for the first time, and they're color coded with red and blue on their backs and all the rest of it. And none of us had seen this before. And yes, some of them were of Southeast Asian descent. Obviously, they're Australians. They've either become naturalized since they arrived, or their ancestors arrived and they were born here. But because a few of them had, a foreign sort of look about them, a conspiracy theory rapidly went around saying that, oh, they've brought in cops from China. I'm like, no, it's way worse than that.
Yeah, that's right.
Your kid goes to school with their kid.
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
way worse.
Yeah. It's your
way
neighbor.
worse.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, correct. It's your neighbor.
Yeah.
And so often this is actually true. No, they're not evil. They're incompetent. It's way worse than evil.
Yeah.
They actually think they're helping. And this is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That the truth of that as a maxim was really impressed upon me during COVID. The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
We mess with people for their own good, and we lose sight of the fact that the single best way for any of us to organize our own lives is in the way that seems best to us, because if we're wrong, we are the ones that pay the price. If people can't be trusted with the authority to make decisions over the things that affect them, how the hell can they be trusted with the authority to make decisions over other people's lives?
Absolutely.
I have never met anyone who can explain that.
Answer that question. So then what's the, from the book, what's the, not stopping people from reading it, but to summarize, what's the solution and the conclusion to this problem?
Yeah, look, real simple.
Here's the problem. Recognize it.
No, I give away all my stuff for free. So I did a talk at the end of the Friedman Conference in Sydney some years ago where it was actually out of that talk that this book was then written. Okay. So it's all out there on the internet already. It's real simple. We accept, you and I accept a priori that there ought to be a limit on the power of government, right? And the vast majority of people, if you were to ask them, should government power have a limit on it, or should they be able to do whatever they want without consequence? Almost every single person is going to tell you that there should be a limit on their power.
Of course.
So then the question becomes, what mechanism? How do we keep that limit in place? If the government is going to be the thing with all this power, what do we put in place to bind them and stop them from exceeding the limit of their power? We might disagree on what that limit ought to be, but we need to agree on the fact that there's got to be a mechanism. There's got to be a way to do this. And human history, politically speaking, is essentially a series of experiments in how to limit the growth and power of government. And we've tried republics, we've tried democratic systems, we've tried benevolent dictatorships.
Could I just interject there and say the big problem with this, I mean, it's a good way to look at it as an academic thought experiment, but it's important to mention that at the end of each of these experiments, when they ultimately fail, is a war of some sort.
Yeah,
a really violent, bloody war where lots of people die in a horrible way, and then usually a prolonged period of starvation, malnutrition, disease, and misery before another
large amounts of death.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you want to see that proven, just research democide. There's research from the University of Hawaii.
Death by government, the most
into democide, death by your own government specifically. So we've tried things like constitutional monarchies, we've tried constitutional republics, we've tried bills of rights. We're going to write all this stuff down, and then, pardon me, one branch of the government is going to make sure that the other branches of the government don't break this thing that we wrote down on paper. The problem is, we know from history that none of these actually work
because of human nature.
There is only one thing that has ever worked, and it doesn't work every single time, but it's the only thing that has worked. The limit of government power is defined by the limit of the people's obedience. And the reason why the failure of a government turns into a bloodbath is because people wait too long to begin to disobey.
That's the truth.
Right? We fail to keep them in check early and keep them on a short leash where we do not trust them. We fail to do that. And as a result, by the time we're actually standing up and saying, guys, you've exceeded your limits, we're not dealing with a constitutional republic that's gone a little bit wrong. We're dealing with a Leviathan that has completely abandoned any pretense of serving the people. And that's where you end up with the bloodbath. That's where you end up with the really big problems. So the limits of government power are defined by the limits of our obedience. And I came back, I was in Venezuela in 2015, and I came back and I spoke at a conference in Australia. And I talked about what I saw. I talked about the collapse of the Venezuelan economy, their way of life, the absolute misery and suffering being caused by command and control, centralized control of their economy. And I wanted to finish on an action point. Like, what do we do? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen in Australia? And people laugh and say, oh, that couldn't happen in Australia. Well, 10 years later, less people are laughing.
That's right.
Some people still are, but less people are laughing. More people can see it. And the point that I finished with was, we need to relentlessly defend ourselves from every government breach of our rights, no matter how petty or small it may seem. And 10 years after I said that, I think the truth of that rings true.
Proven.
Because if we wait until it's serious, then we've waited until it's too late. We have to make them fight tooth and nail for the petty things so that they never get to the point where they're fighting us over something important. And the only way we do that is by actually being willing to disobey much sooner than what we currently are.
I was planning to ask this later on, but let's do it now because it fits. But where my sense, particularly during COVID, was, I mean, I felt like a lot of my friends who felt the same way, not that there was many of them at the time, unfortunately, but very, very isolated and alone. Like it was, it was a real emperor's got no clothes kind of situation where you can see it and only a couple of others and nobody else seems to be seeing the bleedingly obvious.
Yeah.
And it feels like that about Australia, that Australians are very, very compliant, very, very, government needs to look after us, blah, blah, blah. But then when you get out into the community and you speak to regular people, you don't get that impression. More of the people that you speak to are just sort of like, nah, they're all bloody useless. They're all lying to us. They're all bastards and we need to get rid of them. And what's your sense? You've spoken more widely about this stuff for a lot longer than I have. Where is Australia really at? Because I know that the media wants us to believe, like in COVID, that nobody else was seeing it when in fact millions were.
Yeah. So I can't think of the name, but it was a Pommy philosopher / comedian made the joke that the trouble with Australians is not that they are descended from convicts, but it's that they are descended from the jailers. And unfortunately, that's true. There is a really strong jailer streak within Australian society and within Australian culture. We love a rule. We love a busybody. We really do. You're right that as you get out of inner city, downtown, latte sipping areas, you will meet much more real people. But that's where the obedience problem kicks in. You can come out into rural areas and they can tell you all about what's wrong with the government, and then you say to them, okay, well, you got to stop voting for the Nationals and start supporting some of these minor parties. Oh no, I couldn't. I've been voting for the Nationals.
Yeah, I've been voting for them. Yeah, my grandfather voted for them, and
the problem's not my local member. The problem's the other ones. Because there's this loyalty that rural Australians, particularly farm living on the land, there's this loyalty that is incredibly unhealthy. And there is an obedience, a goodness. You would think that country and rural areas would have been the first to break the COVID lockdowns and the COVID rules and to see through it. But actually, statistically, they were not. Ironically, the least COVID vaccinated place in all of Victoria is Brunswick. Inner city, super hippie, latte sipping, Greens voting, anti-vaxxers, right? They're the ones who were actually most willing to say no to the COVID jabs, largely on the basis that they were mandatory. And they felt like, no, my body, my choice kind of response to that on their part.
Okay.
And I have some authority on that part. I grew up in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. I know Fitzroy. I know Brunswick. I grew up in Preston. I know those people and the way they think very, very well. And ironically, out in country areas was where you were most likely, out in small towns, is where you're most likely to get lambasted for not wearing your mask. Because these good salt of the earth Aussies have this obedience streak baked into them, and it's really deep. It's really strong. So where are we at?
Obedience streak, or is it a trust streak? Because they themselves would think of themselves as trustworthy people. Or both.
Certainly trust is a part of it, and far too often we assume that other people's intentions and expertise, etc., is, we look at someone standing up on TV and speaking with tremendous confidence, and we go, well, I would never do that unless I actually knew what I was talking about. So they must know what they're talking about, right? Well, no, they're playing a role.
Than anyone in the world.
Yeah. They're playing a role because they had a career opportunity. They just had to do exactly what they were told by the Premier, and then they got to be the Chief Health Officer for as long as they played the game. So now they're just up there playing the game, right? So you're right. It is a certain amount of there's a trust issue, but there's also a terrible fear of getting in trouble. And I'm very familiar with this because of my upbringing as a goody two shoes. There is a terrible fear of the labels and the slurs and people's opinion of you and what will they think and what will they say and what if I get this, what if I'd ended up with a criminal record from all my work defending human rights down in Victoria. They tried for 2.5 years with criminal prosecutions before they eventually dropped the charges. And that fear holds a terrible, terrible hold over a lot of people who you wouldn't pick. You wouldn't pick them. And they're good salt of the earth Aussies, but there's that fear of being the bad guy, of having the label, of being in trouble. It's really quite an astonishing thing. Now, I don't think that all is lost by any stretch of the imagination for Australia, but I do think we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And I think the point that I would make is, in my observation, so I've been a political commentator for 16 years. As a libertarian, almost that entire time. I was a conservative. I'm a recovered conservative, and I still had some conservative instincts early on, and moved away from those. I've been a full-on libertarian for probably now 14 of those 16 years that I've been a commentator. My observation is that absolutely everyone is a libertarian in at least one area.
I agree.
And almost every libertarian is not a libertarian in at least one.
That's true too.
Right? Right? Yeah. We all have one area where we're a libertarian, and pretty much all of us have one area where we're a little bit of an authoritarian.
In the worst possible way, yeah.
That streak comes out.
But that's because everyone's wrong, damn it.
That's right, because everyone else is wrong, and if I ruled the world. So what we have to do in Australia, in my opinion, is tap into those areas where people are libertarian already. Mm-hmm. And because what happens is people take it on an issue by issue basis. So one person will be a libertarian when it comes to weed, and another person will be a libertarian when it comes to hunting, and another person will be a libertarian when it comes to importing and exporting or aviation safety, because they want to develop some drone technology or what have you. Like, everyone's got this thing where the government has no business in this
basically
thing, right?
Leave me alone when it comes to my thing.
When it comes to my thing, right? Yeah. And so the communications job that we have is to go to those people and say, you know what, you're right. You're absolutely right. And, that's because the principle involved here is XYZ. If you're not hurting anybody, really, whose business is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Or Australia actually belongs to us, not to the government. We should be able to have access to those areas. Did you know that a natural plant that you grow in your own home and smoke in the privacy of your own home without hurting anybody else shouldn't put you in prison? You are absolutely right. Yeah. And then we go, oh, but that same principle applies to that person over there. Oh, I don't like what they do. Well, I get that you don't like it. Like, I look, you know what? I don't really like it either. But you know what? If we're going to say that that's the rule for the thing that you like, we kind of have to say that's the rule for the thing they like too, don't we? And this is the journey that I've been on. This is the process that I've been on. I call myself the normie whisperer. I view myself as kind of the first stepping stone. During COVID especially, a lot of people realized something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was yet, and they didn't know who they could trust. They didn't know who was going to be able to explain it and help them navigate it. And they look around, and there's a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists on this side. There's Alex Jones over there. There's, some weird cult over here. There's all kinds of stuff going on. They're like, well, I no longer belong in the establishment, but where do I go from here? And I've tried to be a relatively safe landing place for those people, a first place for them to take their step out of, and they might go, oh, look, that Topher guy, he's a bit radical. Like, he bangs on about civil disobedience. And I think civil disobedience, we needed it back in the 1960s. But you know what? I think the days
but now, everything's good.
But you know what? He does have a good point when it comes to government spending. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, actually. And I become that first place for them to put their foot and step outside of the establishment. And really, it's just about then educating people on the principles. And so if you watch my work, you'll notice a lot of the time I'll take an issue and I'll say, well, here's the news of the day. And then very quickly I get back to talking about the philosophy behind it, the libertarian principles behind it, the economics behind it, the bigger picture principled stuff. Because that's actually what I'm doing. The topic is just the bait. That's just the hook that reels them in. And then I give them a little bit of an education while they're there. My hope is, my theory is that someone like a Javier Milei, you're familiar with Javier Milei, president of Argentina.
Afuera.
Afuera. He did not become president in a moment. He became president because he spent 10, 15 years previously educating people on economics as an economics lecturer at a university. He built a movement. He built that movement by educating a small number of people who then went on to have conversations with a large number of people. And then all of a sudden, 15 years later, oh, he's come out of nowhere. Well, no, he hasn't. He built that movement one person at a time. And I suspect for most of that time, he didn't know that that's what he was doing. He was just working as a university lecturer.
No, well, that's
right.
Yeah,
and
that's
all
right.
Of a sudden, it all came together and all the pieces came together. And it's a little bit of a similar thing. Not that I ever have ambitions of ever being prime minister or president if we ever become a republic, but it is this one at a time, hearts and minds campaign of just trying to get people to start to go, hey, I'm right about that one thing that I'm really passionate about. But if I'm right about that, I also have to accept that he's right about that and she's right about that. And actually there's a bigger thing at stake here. And as more people begin to go on that journey and accept that truth, then we increase our odds of at some point in the future getting out of the hole that we're in.
Well, you'd also, I can see in that there would be that hope, almost like a Javier Milei, where for that mysterious angel dust that falls on a particular topic, it just takes off and goes viral. It resonates with that many people that it then gets shared 100%. Amongst that many people. And all it needs is that one trigger and off it goes. Which probably explains why in the UK they're kicking out all the rapists and the murderers from the jail so they can make room for all of the Facebook posts and people on
because
YouTube.
Hurty words on Facebook are so much more serious. You know, I love this. I love this idea that words are violence.
Yeah.
And people say this from time to time. I always act a bit amazed. I'm like, oh, wow. You know, I'd never thought about that before. You know, that's funny. If words are violence, how come I've never seen anyone get punched in the pronouns? And that usually puts people off for a while, which is fun.
Because it's just so damn dumb.
It's so absurd. So absurd. You know, sticks and stones. We grew up in a playground saying sticks and stones may hurt my names. Words will never hurt me.
Yeah.
Right? We were raised with a certain level of resilience, and now we reward fragility. You know, Matt Taibbi, was it Matt Taibbi? Who was it? Anti-Fragile, the book. Anyway.
I know the book. I know Matt Taibbi. I couldn't tell you if it was
No, they're not the same thing. I've pulled a name from over here and a book title from over there. Anyway, I think it might be a Matt. Might be a Matt that wrote the book, but it wasn't Taibbi. He was the Twitter Files guy.
He was the Twitter Files, yeah. He's awesome. He's very cool.
But this idea in this book is to basically craft for yourself a life where you are not fragile, you are anti-fragile. When you come under attack, when you are struck, you actually harden. A little bit like a oobleck, you know, where it's that gooey kind of stuff that if you step on it slowly, you'll sink. But if you hit it with a basketball or a bowling ball, it hardens and it stops it. And we were raised to be kind of anti-fragile in our generation. Someone comes at you with something, you step up, you face the thing that's coming at you. Now we've raised generations and rewarded generations to be fragile. Oh, someone called you names. You should just curl up in a ball in the corner and become useless for a while until we extract an apology out of this person by taking out their fingernails.
But it's Marxism, isn't it? I mean, it's just straight Marxism. It's the top of the hierarchy is the most oppressed person. That's the person who deserves all of the resources, all of the attention, all of the love.
Yeah.
So the faster you can rise to being the most oppressed, victimized person in society, it's a completely inverted, irrational, illogical construct.
Where we used to celebrate competence, we used to celebrate people that produced things that made the world better for human habitation in one way or another.
And now that's just oppression.
Correct. And this is where intersectionalism comes in, and this kind of this ranking of having to compete with other people to be more oppressed than them. And this is why the slippery slope argument when it comes to cultural Marxism is actually valid. The slippery slope argument is not always valid, but it certainly is in this case. And it is because whatever the thing is they're fighting for right now, the minute they have it, it's no longer oppressed enough. And someone is going to then take the next step because they need to be more oppressed than the thing that's now being accepted.
Yep.
And so, are the same people that were third wave feminists on the trans movement? Well, no, we know they're not, right? But the trans movement built on the success of third wave feminism. Are the same people fighting for trans rights the same people that are going to fight for pedophiles' rights? No,
they're just hijacking it, aren't they? They're just climbing over the backs of the last.
Correct. And saying, you're the most oppressed person. Yes, absolutely. Right now you are. Yeah, Meanwhile, I'm hovering right behind you because the minute you become socially acceptable, you're no longer oppressed enough. Now it's my turn at the top of the totem pole. Yeah. And then they get angry because someone else climbs over the top of them. And this is where you get the J.K. Rowlings, your trans exclusionary radical feminists, sitting there going, what just happened?
Yes.
The Martina Navratilovas, like she was the world's first lesbian, high-level sports player that was publicly lesbian, fabulous tennis player, wonderfully successful career.
And no one cared.
Radical feminist. Sorry?
And no one cared. It's just, I
just
want to watch you play tennis. You're really, really good at tennis.
You play tennis.
Yeah.
And then the minute she got off when the train got to her station, the cultural Marxism train got to her stop.
Yeah.
Feminism and lesbianism being celebrated and accepted in the culture. Yeah. She got off And then she's like, hang on, train, you can't keep going on to the next stop. And all the trans people that were going, oh, yes, you lesbians, yes, you, absolutely, yes, you're the most oppressed people. All of a sudden, all the trans people are like, our stop's the next stop.
That's right, yeah.
But of course, it's not the last stop.
No,
and it can't be the last stop. They're always going to be looking for the next thing.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting for me, though, because I don't want to leave people feeling like, oh, it's all horrible. Wokeness has peaked.
Oh, absolutely.
This whole thing is falling in a heap. And we see that at a lot of different levels. So we just saw in the UK Supreme Court make a ruling that a woman, for the purposes of their Anti-Discrimination Act, or they've got some other name for it, has to be a biological woman, have to be born as a woman. Now that flies in the face of a federal court decision here in Australia, Giggle versus Tickle. Believe it or not, Giggle versus Tickle is the name of the court case. It is. It's you can look it up. It's absolutely true. It's the funniest thing. Giggle versus Tickle. So Giggle was a women-only dating website, and Tickle was a trans woman, Tickle was a drag queen, I think, and they've ended up coming to blows. It's in court. The Federal Court of Australia ruled in their ruling that the definition of woman includes trans women. That sex is a changeable attribute, that gender is a changeable attribute, and that's now been appealed. While that appeal is underway, this UK decision has come out. So that's going to put them under a lot of pressure. But it's not just that. It's also DEI is falling apart. Yes, Trump had a huge impact when he came in and did what he did. But actually, before Trump, we had BlackRock and Vanguard walking away from their DEI hiring practices in all of the companies. So these are the biggest investment funds in the world. They own a phenomenal proportion of the world.
They were pushing this stuff. They were going, you don't get money out of us unless you do this crazy,
correct. Now,
self-sacrificial nonsense.
I'm gonna pat myself on the back here and say I called this. I did an interview quite some time ago now at the first signs of trouble, and I said this is the chink in their armor, and this is what will bring them down. And it proved to be correct. Under American law, directors of companies have a thing called a fiduciary duty. That's
correct. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so for those that may not know, that requires them to do what is in the best financial interest of shareholders at all times. And if they can be shown to not be doing that, then their liability can rise to criminal liability. Right. Now, there's other things before that, but there comes a point where they can be criminally liable for failing in their fiduciary duty.
Damage the company and the share value.
Yeah. Now, if you start hiring for quotas rather than for competence and the share value suffers as a result, the shareholders can sue you. And that's what began to happen. Only a couple of small lawsuits, and I picked up on them very early on. And I did an interview with someone about it and talked about it. And sure enough, it only took a couple of small lawsuits before Vanguard, BlackRock, all of them went, oh, we see where this is going.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the liability goes up to the directors, and then ultimately, where does it go from there? It goes on to these companies that forced the directors to do what they did.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing is crumbling. There is not a single major American bank still in the net zero banking alliance. Net zero has fallen apart.
They've all gone.
DEI has fallen apart.
All the car companies are dropping it as well. It's just like, this doesn't work and people don't want it.
BMW and Mercedes have both announced that they are spending small fortunes on brand new high technology V8s. Now, yes, they're going to be incorporated with electric motors. That's not going anywhere. But the idea that the internal combustion engine is dead, is dead. That idea is dead. So everywhere we look, we can see that the madness has peaked. But there's two things to that. Number one, every time there is major social change, and we are in a moment of major social change. I think the last time we saw a social shift this big, this fast was the 1960s, the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Yeah. We are watching the counter to that. So the pendulum swung from there all the way up until 2020, 2021, 2022. Yeah. That was the zenith. That was the peak. And it's now begun to swing back the other way. But there are two things to look out for here. Number one is in moments of great social change, opportunists will try and make the most of that for their own purposes. And so, for example, the Marxists are out in force. We've got all these people saying we need Marxism. They're no longer hiding under a rock. They're no longer feeling the need to hide behind the veneer of being green. They're now actually coming out as Marxists. They're coming out as communists and saying, hey, this is what we need. Yeah. So we have to tell a better story. We have to be out there as libertarians, as freedom lovers, as people who believe in small government and essentially believe in each other. Right? Instead of a centralized power to control everybody, we need to be out there with that message. That's number one. But the other thing that happens in moments of great social change is every culture breeds its own counterculture. And this is why these changes happen, right? So there's two truisms that have caused this social change to happen at last. The first is that every culture breeds its own counterculture. And this has always been true. The 1960s secular revolution was a rebellion against the 40s and 50s conservatism that itself was a reaction to the death and loss of the Second World War. These are every culture breeds its own counterculture. And what we're witnessing right now is the counterculture to the sexual revolution. All the kids that have grown up under parents who are divorced, who grew up under grandparents who were divorced, they're looking at everyone older than themselves in their own family tree and going, I don't want to be you. I don't want to be you. Grandpa, I don't want to be you either. What do I have to do? How far back in time do I have to look before I find somebody that had their head screwed on right? And they're looking so far back that now they're going, all right, I need to work hard. I need to get a trade, get a job, get married, have kids young, have lots of kids. That's what worked.
Yeah.
And we're watching now the younger
Gen Z is supposed to be it's Gen Z, the most conservative generation in decades.
The next younger one after Z.
It's the one after the current new generation, whatever.
Crazy because they're splitting in half basically. You've got half going down the full on,
blue haired,
too much,
crazy,
look like a walrus, blue hair, all that sort of stuff. And then the other half are looking at that half going, hell no.
Yeah, they're buttoning their shirts up to the top and they're, wearing their socks up.
It's crazy. I've got nephews getting married at 18, 19 years of age with every intention of having a half a dozen kids.
Wow.
And not because we're some deeply religious cult or whatever. This is actually, that's a reflection of what's actually happening with them culturally. Yeah. It's quite phenomenal. So every culture breeds its own counterculture, but also the revolution always eats its own children. That's the second truism. Right? Look at Martina Navratilova. Look at J.K. Rowling. Look at Germaine Greer. Look at all the heroes of the revolution. They're now being eaten alive by their own children. Why? Well, because the train didn't stop at their station. Yeah. Right? I mean, it stopped and they got off and then the train kept going, okay? Yeah. So in the end, the revolution always eats its own children. Most of the people, I think that's not quite true. Not quite a majority. Most of the early revolutionaries in the French Revolution ended up being beheaded on their own guillotines. Right? The people who led the revolution early ended up being killed by their own revolution. The revolution always eats its own children. Now, those are two separate truisms. Every culture breeds its own counterculture. The revolution always eats its own children. Those things are always true over a long enough time scale. It always happens. But it's when you see them happening at the same time that you know you're on the cusp of phenomenal, rapid social change. And I called this back in 2021. I said, the conditions are now right. These two things are now intersecting. The culture has bred a counterculture. The revolution is eating its own children. We are on the cusp of phenomenal social change. And that is exactly what is unfolding right before our eyes. The 2020s are a decade like the 1960s that will set a new direction for our culture that will then carry on for another 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah. And we're seeing that throughout Europe at the moment with the protests that just keep growing and growing and growing. It's
and the European Union is cancelling elections. They're seeing political parties get deregistered. They're using every single trick that used to work, and it's not really working so well anymore. At times it is, but it's not working so well. They're not quelling the movement. They, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. Well, sometimes a movement has enough momentum that it's become a hydra. You strike the head and two more pop up. Well, and that's where they're at.
It looks exactly like what happened with Trump, which was the more that they attacked him, I mean, thank God he was strong enough to actually withstand it. And however he was powerful enough to get through it, I don't know, but, Yeah. It's a good thing for the world, but it's the exact same reaction that you're seeing in Europe. They cancel the elections, and people haven't quietened down. People have risen up even more so. Le Pen in France, since the ruling came down, it's like their supporters skyrocketed since then.
Yeah.
What is it about Australian politicians that can't understand the dynamic of what's happening? It's not what Trump said, it was the way he said it. It was the fact that he was answering the questions that the people were asking and being authentic about it, like speaking like we would talk around at a bar or at the dinner table. They can't do it.
We've all been in relationships, right? Most of us have dated a few people before we got married, or we might still be in that process. We've all been in relationships. Have you ever noticed that there can be people who can say, I love you, and you feel empty and alone with them?
Yeah.
Then there are other people who say nothing at all, and you feel their presence, and you feel that love, and you feel that connection to them.
Absolutely.
And you cannot fake that.
Yeah.
You cannot fake that. And that is something that someone like Donald Trump has in spades.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't remember who said it, but there's the old joke. Once you learn how to fake authenticity, you've got it made. All right. Now, Trump doesn't fake authenticity. I went to Mar-a-Lago for a fundraiser of his in February last year.
Oh, really?
I think called the Trumpettes. It's a fundraising event. Fabulous. I was a guest of Kevin and Sam Sorbo. Kevin Sorbo played Hercules back in the day. He was the actor who played Hercules in all the Xena Warrior Princess TV show, and then in his own Hercules TV show.
That's cool.
They live in Florida, just down the road from Trump, and I met them at a conference in London the year before, and then I told them I was going to the US to speak at some conferences, and Kevin was actually helping to MC on that particular occasion, and so he managed to wrangle me an extra ticket. I didn't have to pay for it, which was good because they were thousands of dollars per head.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting at table number one. I'm right in the action zone because the MC was on. You know, I was seated at the same table as where the MC was. Right, just an amazing experience.
Awesome
just one of those things that just happens, and you're just like, wow. And the circus around Trump. The circus around Trump is insane. We do not have anything like it in Australia. There is no corollary. The level of security, the level of hype, the level of excitement.
Yeah.
I'm watching, Carrie Lake, well-known global media name. The My Pillow guy, Mike, whatever his name is. General Flynn. These,
serious people.
Sam Sorbo, Kevin Sorbo himself, Hercules himself, hyped.
Yeah.
These people are excited. This is a room that no one in that room was worth less than probably $10 million. And there were multiple billionaires inside that room. And they were lined up.
They're excited.
They were lined up. I'm not making this up. I've got the pictures. They were lined up against the red velvet. They had the velvet kind of bollards with the velvet in between to hold the walkway for Trump to come down. And all the Secret Service come in first and kind of line it. And then he walks down the middle and he picks people he wants to go and shake hands with. The circus is unbelievable. There were billionaires stacked 5 deep at the velvet, reaching over each other, trying to wave at Donald Trump. We have no equivalent here in Australia. There is nothing in Australia.
Well,
like
even
this.
down to you see that he'd have a football stadium full of 50,000 people with another 20,000 in the car park
in the overflow.
And you're going, who goes to see a politician and goes through all the crap of going to a football game, which is the worst part of the game?
Yeah,
to see a politician.
But here's the thing. Here's the reason why I tell you that story. Apart from the fact that I just want to flex on the fact that I've been to Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, if you can make a point out of this, it's even better. That's really cool.
I can't claim any credit. It's just a thing that happened. It was amazing. But because of where I was and who I was with, the line got thinner where we were.
Right.
And I was able to hear his interactions with people as he shook their hands. And these are, some of them are people that he knows and he's shaken hands with before, and others not so much. But I listened carefully, and he was absolutely real.
Mm.
With all of that hype around him, he didn't buy into his own bullshit, right? He was absolutely real. He looked each person in the eye. He listened. He spoke back to them. He connected with each and every one of these people.
You keep hearing it from people who actually speak to the guy, and not the media that's there, refusing to, saying don't listen to him.
Yeah, his capacity for presence, I think, is one of his greatest gifts. When he's in a room, whether it's a negotiation or a handshaking down the aisle like what I saw there, he is fully present inside that moment and inside that room. Which
is fascinating because he comes across as aloof when you see him interacting with the media sometimes, not always, but yeah.
Yeah. It's easy to portray people the way that you want to portray them. I mean, they tried to portray Kamala Harris as some great orator, against all the evidence, some great stateswoman. That is not what the evidence says. And, they want to portray Trump as being a buffoon, as being impulsive and uncontrollable and untrustworthy and so forth. And I think that's the opposite of what I saw.
Well, that's why I think when you watch him that you see it's a false narrative. Yeah, and yes, he exaggerates. Yes, he can sometimes come off as aloof, but almost when it's a fake question that he's being forced to answer. But very often it's still, you see the authentic man come out and just
So if you read The Art of the Deal, which
I read it many years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're aware then that chaos is a part of his strategy.
Yes.
He will walk into a room.
Yep.
He will say a few things that are going to set things off, set things sparking.
And then he watches what happens.
The thing with chaos is if you're the one causing it, it doesn't bother you. Right? So he remains completely in control. No matter how this spins out of control for everybody else is reacting. Watch what he's just done with the EU and with tariffs. All right? So I did a video on this a little while ago, but obviously there's going to be a lot of people watching this that aren't familiar with my work yet. So I'm going to spoil my own video for you. We've just watched Donald Trump impose tariffs on the entire world. Now, I am wholeheartedly anti-tariff. Tariffs are a terrible idea. But I've been saying for 10 weeks now, this is not tariffs. This is tariff-driven diplomacy. That's what this is. He's walked into the room. In this case, the room is the global stage of world leaders, and he has just sowed chaos all over the place. He is completely calm because he knows exactly what he's doing. And he's not sowing chaos for chaos's sake. He's sowing chaos with an objective in mind, and I can prove that. I watched what was happening. He's rolling out tariffs on steel, tariffs on aluminium. He's getting a phone call from the UK, and the UK says, oh, we're close to getting an exemption from the tariffs. He gets a phone call from Albo, and Albo comes away going, oh, looks like Australia's going to get a carve out. And then wham, nobody's accepted. No exceptions. Everybody slaps everybody down. And then the markets tank. 2 days later, he says, oh, okay, everybody,
90-day
I've heard you. We are all lining up to get free trade deals with us. I'm going to wind it back to 10% for 90 days to give you time to negotiate your free trade deals, right? The media says he's capitulated. He had to do a reversal here, blah, blah, blah. No, that was his play the whole time, and I can prove it. Because the EU then come out there, was it Christine, not Christine, van der Leyen, Ursula van der Leyen from the EU comes out and says we shouldn't be doing tariffs. Tariffs are bad. And Trump says, great, I will eliminate every tariff, every non-tariff barrier, and we will agree to mutually remove every single subsidy that creates a trade advantage on every side. All you have to do is reciprocate, and you will have complete, unfettered, free trade, full access to the US market. Now, I can prove that was his play all along, because he did it in 2018 with Jean-Claude Juncker when he was the head of the EU. Tariffs from Trump, exact same play, 25% on steel, tariffs on aluminium, tariffs on European cars. Juncker is sent to the US, to the White House, as an emissary of free trade to extol the virtues of tariff-free trade. Trump has literally just reeled him in like a fish. Sit there in the Rose Garden out the front of the White House. They talk. He says to Juncker, he says, okay, you know what? Well, sorry, first he makes Juncker defend free trade.
Yes.
Juncker is sitting there as the commissioner of the EU saying tariffs are bad. Trump then goes, oh, it's funny you should mention that. I happen to have sitting next to me a complete free trade deal. What a coincidence. You can have zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, and zero subsidies influencing trade with you. All you have to do is go first. We will match you on the day that you do it. You just have to do it first. Juncker, and then he has a press conference. How can Juncker say no? So then Trump and Juncker sit there in front of the press and say, free trade between the EU and the US. This is all on the record. You can Google it. You can look it up. Juncker goes back to the EU and, of course, fails to get the EU to agree because they cannot possibly end their subsidies for EU industry because then they wouldn't get re-elected because they're literally using taxpayer dollars to buy votes. So the whole thing falls apart. Why? Because Trump didn't want free trade? No. Now, here's the thing. If Trump had become president and said, hey, everybody, let's have free trade, the EU would have gone, oh, no, terrible. No, we have to look after our industries. Oh, no, finger wag, finger wag, finger wag. By doing it the way that he's doing it, and he's doing it a second time, by doing it the way that he's done it, he makes them make the case for him so that he can prove, hey, guys, this isn't me. This is them. This is you. You're not willing to do this. He has done the exact same play twice. The EU fell for it both times.
And so did everybody in the media and everybody following. And
Correct.
it's as plain as day that it's like, this is a negotiating point. He's not saying, I'm not going to talk with you, I'm going to slap you with tariffs. He's going, let's sit down and negotiate a deal.
This is tariff-driven diplomacy. The tariffs are the leverage. That's all he wants. He wants leverage to force people to actually make deals with him. He loves negotiating. He loves making deals. He hates being locked in negotiations that don't result in a deal.
Yeah.
How do you make sure you're not wasting your time? How do you make sure that the other side is going to come to the table? You make sure you've got leverage first.
Yep. He proved
That's
this
all he's
again
done.
with the whole Ukraine war situation when they met in
Correct.
Saudi Arabia and they agreed to a ceasefire, and then he got the EU talking about a ceasefire, which was it was the most meaningless, unthought out. It was bullshit. You know, this ceasefire. It's like, yeah, the Russians are winning. Why are they going to stop firing it? Like it doesn't make any sense. But he got the Ukrainians and then the EU, which were more important, to agree to the thing. And then they're all like, we need a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire. Where all of their rhetoric all the way up to that point had been no ceasefire. Russia's got to get out, and we will put more money into it, and
double down, triple down, boots on the ground. Yep.
And it was so effortlessly done and so transparent when you watch them just fall into this trap.
Correct.
And
so, if anyone that has read The Art of the Deal
understands it, he said, "This is what you do."
Through that lens, the man is not a mystery.
Yeah.
He literally published a book that explains him
how to do
which
it.
For me makes it completely unforgivable that world leaders cannot read him and that the media misrepresent him. This man is not a mystery. He's not a flip-flopper. He's not unpredictable.
He's been saying it for 30 years, 40 years. Like, it's the same stuff. He goes, they're ripping us off. They're putting tariffs on us. They're subsidizing their industries against us. We can't sell there. They sell here. You know, this has got to end. So...
and look, I'm a free trade absolutist. I think that free trade, even unilateral free trade, is still of benefit to the country that offers it, even if no one reciprocates. However, he's not a free trade absolutist in that same sense. He wants it to be reciprocal, and he's been very plain about that.
Yeah.
And all he's doing is he's forcing the hypocrisy of the EU and other countries to be shown writ large. Now, according to his Treasury Secretary, within 2 days of him announcing the tariffs on everybody, they had more than 70 countries approaching them looking for bilateral free trade deals with the United States. And it was at that point that he then reversed and went to the 10% for 90 days. And they're now negotiating all of those free trade deals. But the big sticking point is for a lot of those countries is going to be their internal subsidies, their farmer support programs, their industry support programs. Automotive industry gets handouts and gets this and gets that. That's going to be the stuff that the EU and other countries are going to have a very hard time selling to their voters. The irony is, if Trump gets his way, he will not only create a much freer economy in the US with a boom in the US. If he gets his way, he will create a global boom on the back of the reduced barriers to trade and the reduced market distortions caused by subsidies and other things like that in the US. And I want to add one other thing on this, which I called very early on again. Trump is making free trade deals with the US contingent on allowing your citizens freedom of speech. Now, this has been really interesting for me because Trump has not said it. And I think Trump recognizes the importance of not saying it. He's got the bully pulpit, the lectern, so to speak, as the president of the United States. But I think if he knows that if he were to come out and say this, then that would be regarded as an inappropriate use of US government power and presidential power as the president of the United States to turn around and tell Australia, you have to repeal legislation. The UK, you have to repeal legislation. The one who's been saying it has been Vice President J.D. Vance. He is the attack dog when it comes to this stuff, the free speech stuff. He spelled it out to Keir Starmer in an Oval Office meeting, which was well publicized at the time. And boy, did Keir Starmer have no idea what was going on. No. Clueless, freaking clueless.
It was just embarrassing. And I also loved his choice of words too. We have a proud history of free speech. It's like, it was before you.
So this comes back to your question about Australia as well.
Yes.
Our perception of ourselves lags behind the reality by usually at least 20 years.
That long,
and
you think?
That long, if not longer. Because think about it. How did you form your perception of what... You grew up in Australia?
Yeah. Well, I was from New Zealand 16 onwards. So I finished high school, university.
I'll pretend you didn't say that. I'll try not to judge you.
It's how I'm good looking and intelligent. It's the only way to do it.
See, these are delusional. So you grew up and you formed your view of what New Zealand was based on what the grown-ups around you told you that it was.
Yes.
Right? That's your initial impression of where do I live? Is it good? Is it bad? Are we the good guys? Are we the bad guys? Do I like it here? Do I not? Is basically dictated to you by the opinions and attitudes of the grown-ups around you.
That's very cool.
But their own opinion lags. Right? Because
Yeah.
it's just human nature. We have a normalcy bias. We have a lens that has been established in the past. And it takes something quite shocking to break that lens and cause us to develop a new one. Something like COVID caused a lot of people to develop a new lens through which to view the reality of what Australia is today. But absent an event like that, our opinion of where we live continues to be that opinion that we were given by the grown-ups who were around when we were a kid. And as, yes, we hit teenage years and we hit 20s, we hit 30s, we hit the real world, we will learn more. I'm not saying that it's a completely static thing, but it will continue to lag way behind.
It's interesting, actually, you say that. I agree entirely. And I've been saying since leaving Australia and talking to people, there's a perception out there that Australia is da, 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 da. And I'm like, yeah, that was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it was paradise on earth. 30 years ago, you could build a business, do whatever you want to do. It was the best place on earth you could possibly live. But we now have a bunch of Marxists and communists in government who have progressively just destroyed that. We've now got a cost of living crisis. The cost people in other countries, it's like, you have no idea. We pay for things that you couldn't even fathom having to pay for. It's that ridiculous. So yeah, there's a 30-year lag in perception of a place.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so if you ask an Australian, is Australia a great place to live? Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Australia's the best place in the world. Okay, I agree it's really good. But if you actually just bring your perception up to right now, you realize exactly what you said. The 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. That was the golden decades.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And by the mid-90s, it was shifting.
Yep.
The micromanagement of government was coming in. The nannying, the bossing was starting to come in. The first thing that I remember seeing as a kid was actually late 80s. It was this anti-domestic violence campaign that was plastered all over buses.
I vaguely remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was domestic violence, Australia says no, or something like that. And it had this angry face of a man in a fist. And it was plastered everywhere. And it was the first time I felt that heavy hand of government. I'm a kid, right? The only person I've ever hit is my brothers, and only because they hit me first, right? But I'm the judgment of the masculine. Right,
that suspicion that it puts into everyone's mind about every man in the country. Yeah.
And that was the first time I encountered it. And it left such an impression that I remember it. I remember it very clearly. I remember roughly what the ads looked like. And it's gotten really quite terrible. The level of micromanagement, the level of bossiness, of nannying that we get, the amount of prejudice from the government directed against men in particular. They're the obvious ones right at the moment because that is what's happening. But also other groups as well. But our perception is still stuck in the 90s.
Yeah.
And this is a problem.
Yeah.
Because it only took 10 years for Hugo Chavez to completely destroy Venezuela.
Yeah.
Actually less. It took about 8 years. All right. Which means that it will have already happened 10 years ago by the time people first begin to go, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
Job done. It's been the collapse happened and finished 10 years ago. You are 10 years into a failed state before the average Australian is going to sit there and go, oh, hold on a second. This isn't the place I was born
she'll
into.
Be right, ain't right anymore. Yeah.
Correct. And unfortunately, people, again, like I said earlier, people mock me for talking about Venezuela. When I came back from Venezuela, I said there are a couple of really key things to look out for. All right, I'll go through the list with you. And I said this is on record. It's on the internet. Video from 2015. Look out for price controls.
Yeah.
The government deciding what the price of something is going to be.
Check. Yep.
Do we have price controls in Australia? Hell yes, we do. Rent controls, all kinds of things. Look out for quotas.
Yep.
Because as soon as you start manipulating a price, if you manipulate it up, well, people get angry at you. So which way are you manipulating it? Down to below its market rate. Well, if you manipulate it down, then you get runs, you get excess demand. Now people start running out. The thing that was unaffordable is now unavailable. So you have to introduce quotas. That's the next thing. And quotas are less obvious in Australia, but there's a lot of talk about quotas, how many investment properties you can own, whether you're allowed to have spare bedrooms in your own home, right? A bedroom tax has been proposed by some members of some extreme Marxist political parties, these sorts of things. Quotas. We had quotas, obviously, during the COVID supply chain shocks on toilet paper. We've got quotas right now on eggs, because every time a chicken gets a sniffle, the government goes and kills every single chicken in the entire
goes and kills
facility,
the entire farm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because obviously we want to save their lives by killing them all. Anyway, not quite sure how that one works. But quotas, they're a real thing. Nationalisation. Now, in my former home state of Victoria, because I've moved out now, they are bringing the electricity grid back under state control. The State Electricity Commission is coming back in. The National Broadband Network was an intentional design by the Liberal Party, by the way, by our Conservative Party, to bring our communications back under government control. It's a government-owned business, because they privatised Telstra previously.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, well, we need a government internet provider. And so they created the NBN Co. And they wrote non-competition clauses and restrictions onto Telstra and Optus and others so that no one could compete with the NBN. It was a non-competitive government-owned industry. So we have nationalisation going on in lots of different layers of our society. There was a fourth one, which will come back to me in a moment. But the final one is capital controls. The fourth one is a manipulated exchange rate.
Yeah.
Right. The black market exchange rate, which is the real exchange rate, being different from the official government one.
Yep.
Now, we haven't quite got there yet.
No.
Okay, we're still on the official exchange rate. But what I will say is that things like CPI, inflation, are highly manipulated numbers.
Yeah, totally.
Which then translate. Okay. So when we don't have the official exchange rate and the real exchange rate. That hasn't happened yet. But we have the real economy and we have the official economy, and they're not the same thing, right? And then what happened? So in Venezuela, this became crystal clear, because they had about 4 or 5 different exchange rates depending on who you knew. And the reason for that was because the government wanted to look good. They wanted to pretend inflation wasn't as bad as what it was. So they would pretend the exchange rate is this. But the black market exchange rate is that. And anyone that knows anything about markets knows that if there's 2 very different exchange rates for the same thing, you can arbitrage that.
That's right.
You exchange out through this one and back in through this one. You keep the difference and then just keep that money going around. So the minute the government wants to manipulate and control the value of their dollar, the exchange rate of their dollar, away from market rates, they instantly have to put in place capital controls.
Yes.
And so now, if you're the wrong kind of business where you don't have friends in the right places, you can't get the good exchange rate that you need, then you end up not being able to restock your shelves because you can't import replacements to what you sold. And I wish I had the photograph, but in this talk, the talk was titled "Condoms, Toilet Paper, and Venezuela." Was the name of the talk. Condoms, toilet paper, in Venezuela. If you Google Topher Field, condoms, toilet paper, Venezuela, you will find this talk of mine from 2015. And I show photographs in that. We walked around a mall, and there was one shop completely stocked up, all the shelves chock-a-block full. Right next to it was a store called Furla, which is an international fashion brand. Furla, quite a high-end brand. Yeah. In that store, and I have a photograph, they had 3 pairs of sunglasses and 1 handbag. Every other shelf completely empty. And they had an attendant sitting down the back, sitting there. Once we were out of the shopping centre and back into private areas, I talked to my guide about what's this? Help me understand this. And he said, the store that's fully stocked is owned by someone that has connections in the government. So when they sell, they can then trade those bolivars back into US dollars to restock and import at a good exchange rate where they can still make a profit.
Right.
Furla
does
not have those connections. And so I said, well, they're never going to sell those sunglasses or that handbag. Anyone that's going to import them will have already bought them. Why don't they shut down? Because the government has brought in a rule saying that any private business owner that goes bankrupt or closes their doors is only doing it to try and bring the government into disrepute and continue this misinformation claiming that our economy is bad, and they go to prison.
But how do you keep a store open when there's no product to sell, and how do you pay wage? You just got to figure it out.
You figure it out. Because if you don't, you're trying to make the government look bad. You've become an enemy of the state and you go to prison.
You go to jail.
You go to jail. And this is all around the exchange rate. So there was a relative of that guide who ran a tiling store in Caracas City. and she made a trade deal. She made a deal to import a bunch of tiles at an exchange rate that worked for her. Then the government would not allow her to get that exchange rate. And they required her to get another exchange rate, and then they refused to let her back out of the deal. So she was forced to go through with the transaction at a negative ROI. Her business went bankrupt. She couldn't pay her bills. Her warehouse, her showroom shut down, and she went to prison.
And she went to prison because her business failed in an economy that couldn't work.
Because she shut her doors and was therefore trying to make the government look bad. Yeah. And the thing is, the distance from where we are to there is much shorter than people think.
Yeah.
Way shorter than people think. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
And Albo's talking about essentially price controls.
Correct.
And
all of the things.
Quotas.
All of the things.
All of the things. All of the bad ideas that have failed throughout history multiple times over and over again. These are his policies. And then Dutton appears to be going, whatever Albo says, I second that. That's,
pretty much. Pretty much. There are more silver linings inside Dutton's policies than what there are in Albanese's.
That's not a high bar to traverse, is it?
Yeah, exactly. They're not good. They're not good policies.
No.
You can just pick a few more silver linings from within them. That's as good as it gets in Australia right now.
So then let's finish up, because I know you need to get away, and we'll keep talking for hours because this is fun. But then you've got a couple of videos out, or multiple videos out actually, with your marbles telling people exactly how the preferential voting system works, and that it's not the totally, unintelligible. It's actually a really good system.
Yeah, it's actually genius. It's actually the people that wrote our Constitution had the benefit, because it was only in the 1898, I think, is when they began, and then it was ratified in 1901. They had the benefit of looking at the American Constitution, the French Constitution, the various forms of Westminster democracies that had flourished around the world, in order to learn and in order to inform what they did in our system. And the preferential voting system we have in Australia is freaking brilliant. This is a hill I will die on. It is a really, really, really good system. And I define good as it is a system that will give you an outcome that is the closest possible outcome to the intentions of the voting public.
Voters, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you'll get a good government, because the voting
because when there's no choice, there's no choice. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And in this case, if there's no real choice, there's no real choice. But again, that's our fault. That's our fault. That's, you get the government you deserve. I agree that our government sucks, but we have to accept that what that means is we suck, right? Yeah. And we have to fix ourselves. Yeah. We have to actually fix. If we can be bought with our own money. Can you imagine a slave auction where they're patting down the slaves and pulling the coins out of their pocket? I'll buy you with this. That's what we've got. That's what we've got, and we fall for it. So I'm sorry, we deserve it. We're a bunch of idiots, and we deserve it. But on a slightly happier note. So the preferential voting system is very, very good. And what I think we need to do, and I've been very public about this, is we need to reduce the major parties' vote down to the lowest level it's ever been, a historical low. This is Labor Party, Liberal Party, Greens, Nationals. I call all of them the establishment parties. We need to reduce their vote down as low as their primary vote down as low as we possibly can, and boost the primary vote of what I consider to be the freedom-friendly minor parties as high as we possibly can. The notable ones there are the Libertarian Party. They're the ones that I support. Full disclosure. They're my party. I love them. But there's also One Nation, if you're a bit more nationalist and a little bit less libertarian. One Nation are really solid. They're really good on a lot of stuff. They're not quite as good when it comes to freedom of movement of people. They're not quite as good when it comes to free trade, but on a lot of stuff, red tape, green tape, just letting businesses be businesses and do their thing, getting the government out of your life. They are really good on a lot of that stuff.
Which is the bottom line,
Yeah, well, right now, that's where we're bleeding. That's the arterial bleed, is on that stuff. So what we need to do is essentially triage all of the parties. There's the red parties, which are, red because they're communists. Yeah. But into that, me personally, I put the Greens, I put the Labor Party, I put all the Teals. Most independents, the vast majority of independents, are actually left-leaning. That's just the nature of how our political incentives work. They're the Reds.
Yep.
I want them. I never want my vote to flow through to them.
Yes.
So the way it works is you will number every single box in the lower house. You have to put a number next to every single box. That doesn't mean that your vote goes to every single party. All right. you can use the major parties as blockers. I'll get to that in a second. So you've got the Reds. You do not want your vote ever to reach them.
So
You've
you
got the
just
Greens.
don't put them anywhere on your voting form.
Well, we'll get to them in a second. We'll get to what you're doing with them in a second, but we're just categorizing for now. You've got the red ones.
Yep.
You've got the green ones. They're the ones that you'd be happy for your vote to end up with one of them, supporting one of them. Libertarians, One Nation, a bunch of others. And then
by green, you mean good. You don't mean green as in green.
Sorry, yes, I mean good. I mean, yes, I'm using a stoplight. I'm using green is go, red is stop, amber is All right. And so then in between, you've got your amber parties. And I would put, for example, the Liberal Nationals. Now, I don't think they're a good party at all, but I would much rather them over Labor. I would certainly rather them over the Greens. So here's what you do. You put every single one of your green parties, not the Greens, but all the ones that are green, that are good, at 1, 2, 3, 4, as many as you have to number. You number all of them. Don't pick one and then put the Liberal Party. Number every single one of these good parties first.
Yep.
Then when you run out of them, then you put, in my case, the Liberal Party as the preferred of the major parties. Mm-hmm. Then I will put the Labor Party immediately below the Liberals. And I'll explain the logic behind this in a moment. Then below Labor, I put all the crap. Greens, Teals, Marxist parties, but I repeat myself. Yep. So what this does, the way it works in the lower house is whichever candidate gets the least votes is eliminated, and all their votes are then distributed to those voters' second preferences. Mm-hmm. It's not the party that directs the preferences. This is a common mistake that people make. They think which way is the party going to direct my preferences? No. Parties don't direct preferences. Your preference will go where you put it on your piece of paper.
So when people say that, just to be clear, it's not that the party actually goes there. It's just that in their how to vote cards that they hand out to people, that's where it says this is what you should do. So you ignore that.
Correct.
And they have no say over where your vote goes.
You do. Yeah, that's what they recommend that you do, but they have no control. Your vote goes where you send it on your ballot.
Okay.
So the party, the one that gets eliminated, all of their votes are now distributed to the number 2 preference. Then the parties get reordered because maybe those number 2 preferences have gone overwhelmingly to the candidate that was last, but now they've leapfrogged and now they're only second last, and we've changed who gets eliminated next. Yep. But we repeat this process: eliminate the lowest, distribute the preferences to the 3rd place, 4th place, as many as necessary until we've gone down. And ultimately, what you're going to get is there's only going to be 2 parties left. And this is why it's called a 2-party preferred system. And there's ways of voting around 2-party preferred. I'm not going to go into the details of how scrutineering works and all of that. But the bottom line is, in the vast majority of seats, it's going to come down to Labor versus Liberal in those 2 seats. And I'm sorry, but we're not going to change that this election. There is no landslide coming. Yeah. Right? There are no white knights. Gandalf isn't about to come over the hill with the sunrise behind him and charge into the valley and defeat the unit party. That's not happening this election. No. And so what matters is that if you put Liberal and then Labor above all the bad parties, they will have already been eliminated before Liberal and Labor are both eliminated. Mm-hmm. Which means that your vote will never reach them. It will never go to them.
Which is
the major parties in the middle of your ballot are effectively a blocker, right? Because they're getting it eliminated right towards the end.
Yeah.
And your vote will never reach these other parties because they will be eliminated before your vote ever gets to them. So, and I do think it's important to include the Labor Party. And this is really controversial. People get really upset at me about this. Now, keep in mind, in the lower house, you have to number every box, whether you like it or not.
Okay.
All right. But there are some seats that come down to a contest between the Labor and the Greens parties. Inner city Sydney, inner city Melbourne.
And you still want Labor over Greens.
You still want Labor over Greens. You do not want to reward the even more extreme end of politics.
Yeah.
And so let's take, for example, in the Senate, where you don't have to number every single box. You have a choice. You can number 6 above the line or you can number 15 below the line. Let's just go above the line because it's easy. Same principle applies. Number every single good party first before any majors. Once you've run out of the good parties, you put the Liberals, and that becomes your catch-all. Worst case scenario, if your vote isn't going to help get a good minor party senator elected, it's going to go to the Liberals, not Labor.
Yeah.
Then, and this is controversial, people don't like it when I say this, have a think about putting Labor after the Liberals. Because
it's going to be them anyway, and you want them still above the rest.
The Greens depend on gathering preferences from other parties in order to get their senators elected. And they usually get just about a senator per state, per election. So you have a choice. You can either leave Labor off entirely, and if the Liberals are eliminated, then your vote is eliminated. Once in the Senate, because you don't have to number every box, your vote can exhaust. It can disappear. Now, at that point, you're no longer having any bearing on the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But if you put Labor at the very end, then should it come to that point, you will at least still have some influence.
You still
over
cancel
whether
out
that last
preference vote that would have gone to the Greens. Yeah.
Okay. Now, most likely your vote will never get there because it'll end up getting a good minor party senator elected, or worst case scenario, it'll get and help to get another Liberal Party senator elected. But if the numbers are just wrong, and that's not going to happen, you can either have no effect, or you can help to hedge against the Greens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what you're left with.
And that's really, really good advice. I'll put a link to, well, obviously your websites and to the voting in the description.
The marbles video.
Yeah, to the marble video.
I'm known as the marbles guy, which is kind of weird because I've been doing stuff on water policy and irrigation, water and farming for 16 years. Obviously, COVID. I'm kind of known for my documentary Battleground Melbourne.
Battleground Melbourne.
14 awards. You can watch it for free at battlegroundmelbourne.com, or you can buy it if you want to support me. You can buy it from my website.
And I'll warn people it can be, if you were in Victoria at the time, you might not be ready to watch that, which I wasn't. It was deeply upsetting to be reminded of what happened not that long ago. And
what's also amazing though, Damon, there's people who lived it and have that response that you've just described. There's also a lot of people that were in Victoria and have no idea what happened just outside their door. Absolutely none. And they watch that and they get back in touch with me and they say, Topher, I want to tell you I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I had no idea. I didn't realize what you guys were going through because I just shut my door and watched the TV.
Yeah. Anyway, Topher, thank you so much for your time. That was awesome. And
I appreciate it.
I'll keep following your work, and I hope that everybody watching this will also subscribe to your channel. And I look forward to speaking to you soon. Maybe after the election, we'll have a powwow about how things went.
Look, I appreciate it. If anyone wants to follow me, just at Topher Field on all the socials, X, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Good People Break Bad Laws is my website and my merch. I've also got a bunch of other designs and stuff. So just go there, have a look, check it out. And just know that you'll be helping to support me. I don't get money from any political parties, any lobby groups. I have no advertisers. I have no sponsors. No, I just make money off people that love my work and support me.
And he's getting almost a couple of videos per day, and they're really, really good, especially going into the election, talking to some really interesting people and just simplifying a lot of complex discussion points that are in the news right now. So love your work, Topher. Thank you again for the time.
Thanks, Damon. Appreciate it.
Okay. Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you.